Welcome on into the Wolverine.com podcast. Clayton Sayfie here with Anthony Broome on Thursday. We got a good show coming up for you. We will have an interview with Pete Nakos, On3's sports business and transfer portal reporter. We will talk about the end of the spring transfer portal window in both football and basketball, some trends, how Michigan did retaining its roster, all of that. We'll also talk some transfer portal to start off the show, and then Namari Burnett staying with Michigan basketball for another season. AB, I got a question for you to start off the show. Do you like America?
Do I like America? I love America.
Do you love America? Okay, he loves America.
I do.
Do you
USA number one?
Do you love good deals out there? You know, you're shopping, you get a good deal.
I live for good deals. I live for two things. I live for America, and I live for good deals.
Well, AB, I got the best deal in America for you. You know what it is? Promo code UM1 at thewolverine.com. It gets you 2 months of premium access for just $1. And it's me today. It's Anthony Broome today. Chris Ballas not with us today. You want to know why? He's having a sit-down interview today with Dusty May, Michigan men's basketball coach. So you're going to want to get in over at thewolverine.com to get coverage from that and so much more, Michigan football, basketball, and recruiting. Join us on our message board. Promo code UM1 for 2 months of premium access for $1, 50 cents a month. Hey, if you DM me on Twitter or something like that, I'll Venmo you the $1. Who cares? We'll get you on the site over at thewolverine.com. So go check us out over there. AB, let's talk some transfer portal. We'll start with the commitments. Michigan with 3 in the last week. And let's just start with wide receiver and Michigan getting a couple of those, 2 completely different situations. CJ Charleston at Youngstown State from the FCS put up over 500 receiving yards last year, played 5 seasons at Youngstown State, missed the year in 2022 due to an Achilles injury. But you know, has had really a solid season last year. It has been a solid player, but he's going, up a couple levels to the Big Ten, or one level to the FBS, but really, heading to the Power 4. And then Amorian Walker, who everybody knows, he took a little spring break down at Ole Miss for 3.5 months. Now he's back at Michigan in the fold. We knew Michigan needed to add receivers in the transfer portal. He played defensive back this spring at Ole Miss. He played DB last year at Michigan, but now expected to transition back to wide receiver. AB, we knew they needed wide receivers. They got a couple.
Yeah, and I think they're 2 good additions too, in terms of you took one depth guy and one basically lotto ticket. So there's a little upside with both additions, but the upside would more be towards Amorian Walker, who now goes into year 3 of what the hell is he, despite being a freaky athlete. I look at CJ Charleston. He's a guy that you're probably looking at as like a backup to Tyler Morris at the Z spot. And then Amorian Walker, he steps in, and I bet, I expect him to compete for time at the X. I think Fred Moore gets some time there. Amorian Walker is going to play for some time there. Peyton O'Leary is a guy that is going to compete for time there. But, when you look at this room now, they spent most of spring ball with 5 scholarship guys in O'Leary, Tyler Morris, Frederick Moore, Samaj Morgan, Kendrick Bell. And Kirk Campbell talked about this a few weeks ago. Like, you are a pulled hamstring, a rolled ankle, or some kind of injury away from all of a sudden being kind of light there. So, they were never going to go out and get Keandre Lambert-Smith. They were never going to go out there and get a number 1 wide receiver. I think they like their top 3. I like their top 3 quite a bit. It sounds like a law firm of Morgan, Morris, and Fred Moore. And then from there, we'll see what happens. But Charleston, to me, it's, I talked about how it looked likely they'd probably make some sort of Dalen Baldwin-esque type of addition. To me, this fits that bill in terms of a veteran guy playing up a level, rounding out your wide receiver room. And Amorian Walker, he's interesting, man, because, again, he was injured last year in fall camp. They really wanted to give this cornerback thing a try. He's 6'3", 180, 190. I'm not exactly sure what he weighs in at now, but elite movement skills, a guy that, again, I just think he's in a similar pot to Alex Orji in a lot of ways, where he's too good an athlete to not find a role for him somewhere. And, the fact that he can kind of come back to Michigan now after what you described as a spring break, he can come and compete for time at receiver. Again, I don't know what type of role he's been guaranteed. I don't know what his ball skills look like at wide receiver. We really never got a ton of looks at him at receiver when during his freshman year. But again, both additions, you got Charleston, who's a depth guy, and you've got now this taller target with speed, with athleticism that if it clicks for him could be a guy that takes the top off of a defense. So a lot of people have asked, I suspect he's not going to play two ways. I think this is an opportunity to get reps back at wide receiver. So we'll see what happens. But all of a sudden, you kind of like the depth and what the room has now. It maybe doesn't have a top flight number one option in it, but I think they can conjure up some magic from this group of guys that they have.
Yeah, I think the number one wide receivers you're talking about, one commanded a lot of money in the transfer portal, and two probably wanted to go somewhere where there's a solidified starting quarterback who is proven. And, I just don't think Michigan has that at this point. It doesn't mean somebody's not going to play well there this fall at the position, but I think they knew they needed bodies. This is kind of an example of that with CJ Charleston. And then Amorian Walker is kind of a no-brainer. Like, if he wants to come back, and wants to play wide receiver, like, he had that opportunity. I think it was voluntary, even though the coaching staff encouraged it, the move to corner last year. And we'll see. It just didn't seem like that quite worked out from what I've gleaned from one of our reporters down at Ole Miss. He was not pushing in the too deep there at corner, and maybe a move to wide receiver is kind of in his best interest. Has one career catch for 4 yards in 2022 at Michigan before moving over to the defensive side of the ball last year. I do remember that Rutgers game when JJ threw a deep ball to him. It was kind of a nice ball, and he just either wasn't looking or like kind of went in between his hands. I don't think he turned his head quick enough. Like, you said it with ball skills. Yeah, go ahead.
That's why I felt bad. You're looking for pictures to put in the story. The only picture of him at wide receiver is a ball going through his hands at Rutgers. So it's like, maybe we don't lead with that. But sorry, continue.
No, I think it's a good point. I think we used that picture a couple years ago, then swapped it out because we're like, all right, we don't want to do it.
It's kind of mean.
Dirty. So you have that, very unproven, but like you said, I mean, the upside's there. It's worth a shot there. And then just to read off a couple stats exactly on CJ Charleston, had the Achilles injury in 2022, 33 catches for 503 yards and 4 touchdowns. Last year at Youngstown State, I will say this does feel similar to Dalen Baldwin in a certain respect because it is FCS. He's coming up to Michigan, but Dalen Baldwin, led his team, led his conference in receiving in the spring 2021 season at Jackson State, who was a good team under Deion Sanders. Like, this guy was third on his team in receiving. He's had the injury history. So I think it's a little, Dalen Baldwin didn't have a huge impact here, but he did add a number in the room. He did add somebody you could rely on, especially early in the year before he kind of got passed up by Andrell Anthony and some other guys. Like, he was a valuable player on that 2021 Michigan team. And, if Charleston can be that, and look, the injury is one thing, but maybe being 2 years removed from it is going to be, allow him to take an even bigger jump. So I think it was worth the take. It'll be interesting to see if they take any more wide receivers, but those are those additions. And then just to quickly mention Dominic Zavada, who is the kicker from Arkansas State, who is probably going to be one of the least talked about, most underrated pickups that any team has this season, because Michigan needed a kicker. I think we all pretty much knew that. And this kid goes 34 of 40 in 2 seasons at Arkansas State, which, by the way, will play at Michigan in September. So he was scheduled to come to the Big House. Now he's going to play at least 8 games in the Big House, maybe more if Michigan hosts a playoff game. But 71 of 72 on extra points, 14 of 17 from 40-plus yards, including 2 of 3 from 50-plus. With the 56-yarder, he's made a 53-yarder. Like, this kid has a big leg, and he's accurate, and he's kind of everything you hoped Michigan would be able to land out of a kicker in the portal.
Well, you hope that week 3 game doesn't come down to kicks. I'll say that right off the bat.
True.
But again, yeah, it was when the transfer portal opened on the 16th, and you started to see these guys trickle out and enter, and I was working on something at the time where just looking at guys that entered that would make sense if Michigan pursued them, and he jumped in the portal, and he was one of the first guys that wound up on that list. So it's interesting that he does wind up coming to Michigan. Yeah, I mean it's an addition that I think we're both in lockstep. They needed. I want to choose my words carefully about how I talk about Adam Samaha, but in the spring game, missed a 30-yard field goal. He, something just weird about the loft on those kicks, just kind of hang up in the air. You want guys to drive the ball, and Zavada's a guy who has experience doing that, and it's similar to he's certainly more probably James Turner than he is Jake Moody. I don't think he's going to go out there and hit a 55-yarder or a 60-yarder or anything like that.
He's made 56.
He did. James Turner made a couple 50-yarders too. Shout out Detroit Lion, James Turner, by the way.
True. 50 is different than 56, though. I will.
Yeah, it is. It is. That is driving the football, and I think that tells you everything you need to know about what they maybe didn't have in the guy who was already there. So I don't know that this is going to be a kicking battle. I think right in the here and now, I think he's probably your starting kicker, and I think you only maybe make that move if you know that you're going to have a legitimate starting role at Michigan as a special teamer. So to me, I think it very sneakily one of their bigger additions of the offseason, because let's just put it out there, like this offense, I don't think is going to be as efficient as last year's was. I think they're going to struggle at times to finish drives because of the quarterback position. So, if your drive stalls out at the 40, the 38-yard line, whatever it is, you pull your kicker out there and you get 3 points out of it. In a lot of games with this defense, that's going to be a win for you, especially in those big games. So I'm a fan of the addition. I think it's, again, like I said, one of the sneakier, more important things that needed to be addressed this offseason, and I'm glad they were able to get their guy.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's a great point on the offense. Last year, James Turner didn't really attempt, one, that many field goals at all, and two, that many long field goals, because it felt like Michigan, was able to really finish drives pretty well, or at least get into the red zone. And obviously they had a good percentage in the red zone. So a good pickup there. Let's talk about departures now. 7 of them last month, kind of during the transfer portal period there that is now pretty much closed. Guys could enter by the end of the day, but they already would have had to have that paperwork filed a couple days ago. But I'll read them off here. Linebackers Jeremiah Beasley, Samaj Bridgman, and Hayden Moore. Wide receiver Christian Dixon. Wide receiver Carmelo English. Offensive lineman Amir Herring. And really the biggest loss, I think, of the spring is corner DJ Waller Jr. We talked a little bit about him on Monday, but all things considered, Michigan did a really good job of keeping its roster together. I think the Jeremiah Beasley one was kind of a shock because he's a freshman early enrollee with a bright future. He goes to Missouri. DJ Waller, by the way, he committed, I think, 2 days or 3 days after he entered the portal to Kentucky. So those guys headed down to, it makes you think. Those guys headed down to SEC country. Remember, in this portal period, guys from the SEC can go anywhere but another SEC school and be eligible this fall. You can't go SEC to SEC in April or, now in the weeks following here and be eligible other than Texas and Oklahoma this year, just because they technically aren't members of the SEC until August 1st. So those are kind of the ground rules. But all things considered, given that SEC teams can't poach from each other in April, can only poach from schools like Michigan and in Big Ten, ACC, that sort of thing, Michigan did a good job, I think.
Oh, man. I mean, it's just another long line of, the hammer's going to fall on Michigan, or, Michigan's going to get totally raided in the portal. It's something else that just didn't happen. You look at these additions, there's one, and I did something the other day, more so, I opened it outside of the spring window. I looked at guys that have left since January 8th, where the season came to an end. You're standing on that podium as a national champion. Obviously, a coaching change since then. A lot of stuff's happened since then. And you look at the guys, I think there were 14 that left or something like that. And, outside of Darius Clemens at wide receiver, obviously Keon Sabb, that's the biggest one of the offseason in general. Certainly DJ Waller. I mean, I look at DJ Waller as it was going to be Waller or Jair Hill, and now it's just Jair Hill. So, I mean, bringing in some competition there, I think is still something they're looking at. But I just see Jair Hill as cornerback 2 right now instead of those guys battling it out in fall camp. The linebacker position, you lose 3 guys. Because I choose to see it this way. I see this as Cole Sullivan scared 3 linebackers to the transfer portal because he's in that mix. I mean, I think he's, maybe let's just say he goes into fall camp as linebacker 5 or linebacker 6. I think by the end of fall camp, he could be in that 2 deep. I think he's that good. I think he showed that during the spring game. So, Beasley, that one kind of stinks only because it's an in-state guy. Shocking. Something weird happens with a Belleville kid again. It's just kind of a tradition at this point. You'll wish him the best, but I don't. You got to remember too, like Samaj Bridgman, Hayden Moore, those guys committed to a coach that was 4 linebacker coaches ago at this point. So
shout out George.
Shout out to George Hilo. Shout out to Chris Partridge as well, by the way,
and Rick Minter, by the way. We don't want to miss anybody. And Brian Jean-Marie.
Of all these departures, I think the one that is maybe most surprising to me, though, is probably Amir Herring. And my view on that is probably clouded a bit by watching him and Samaj play as seniors in high school at Wayne State. I had talked to them both after the game, and I walked away from the conversation I had with both those guys thinking that Amir Herring, really impressed with him, like could be maybe like a future captain on this team. And I think probably compete for a starting job as early as next year, but wasn't going to happen this year. We'll see where he winds up. That one kind of disappoints me, maybe just because more of that personal tie of covering that game a couple of years ago. But other than that, I mean, all we heard about was someone's going to induce Will Johnson. Someone's going to induce Mason Graham, Kenneth Graham, Derek Moore could be a flight risk. Like we heard all of these things, and they're all here, and they're all going to be part of the defense that is going to give Michigan a chance to keep this window of contention wide open.
Yeah, and a couple things on the guys that left. One, I think when you have to look at the full context of the linebacker room, and again, Beasley maybe doesn't fit into this because I think that was the shocking one, but Hayden Moore and Samaj Bridgman, neither of them played a single snap last year. They both redshirted but didn't play in any games. And Michigan's at 9 linebackers after those 3 departures. Like that is, still a pretty good number, and actually, maybe even a high number. So they're fine on numbers there. Like maybe they do want to add one as a depth guy. Like I know they were looking at Nakai Hill Green. He ends up, I believe, at Colorado. So the numbers are fine there. Like you said, 4 linebackers coaches ago. One, the new staff probably doesn't feel the same way about them as George Hilo did, which is fine and natural. And 2, they probably don't feel the same about their position coaches as they did when they came in with the guys that they were recruited by. So I think that's just kind of the way it goes right now in college football. I think that's a big piece of it. And then when you look at some of these guys too, and this includes Amir Herring at offensive line, that 2023 class was kind of weird in that they missed on a lot of their top targets late in the cycle. They had to circle back to guys like Amir Herring, who was predicted to go to Nebraska. Hayden Moore was committed to Scott Frost in Nebraska. Like, then they decided to push because they missed on some other guys. I don't think it's a huge surprise that one, it's only a year and a half in, but one, they haven't made a huge impact, and 2, that they're going elsewhere at this point. So those are the departures. I want to touch on some of the targets real quickly before we move on to our interview with Pete Nakos. But Michigan hosting, unless something has changed, as we speak, Kent State defensive tackle CJ West is on campus. A very good player, I think, would be a great ad. Has a lot of high-level suitors. So does Wake Forest corner Deshaun Jones, who Michigan offered on Wednesday. He's visiting Alabama this weekend. He's heard from a bunch of big-time schools since entering the portal a couple days ago, including LSU, Maryland, Georgia, Indiana, Liberty, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, had 3 interceptions, 2 pass breakups, 37 tackles last year as a Demon Deacon. And then one is we reported on late last night, Grand Valley State, shout out Allendale, Michigan, Division II defensive tackle Javier Suggs, who had a combined 14.5 tackles for loss the last 2 years, is in the portal. He is blowing up in the portal right now. He already visited Arkansas, Wisconsin, Florida State, Kentucky. He is going to see Michigan State this weekend on Sunday, according to Spartan Mag. And then we confirmed with him that he will see Michigan likely after the Michigan State visit. So some targets kind of coming into form here. They've landed a few, obviously, so take some guys off the target list. But pretty clear. I think they want a Cam Good type or better, as a depth guy on the defensive line. I think they know they need a corner as well, maybe a safety. We'll see what they do about linebacker.
Need a couple pieces there. I think offensively, earlier you talked about maybe adding another wide receiver. I think they're good there. I think that they're set there. They've said they're not going to add at quarterback. I don't think they need a running back. I don't think they need offensive line. I think they're set on the offensive side of the ball. I'd be with you, or I'm with them when you just look at what their board looks like right now. Probably need one body somewhere on the defensive line. Certainly probably at tackle, given, Rayshon Benny's coming back from injury. I think, guys like Trey Pierce, maybe still a year or so away from contributing to a rotation. What's that?
And he was hurt too.
Yeah. So some banged up guys there. I just adding one more body anywhere on defense, I don't think is the worst thing in the world, only because now last year they had a historic amount of depth. They don't have that this time around. I think cornerback, it's clear to me that's now you probably just need to add a body there, similar to who's the CJ Charleston or Amorian Walker of the cornerbacks that are in the portal right now. I don't know who that is, but I certainly think you could add one there. Safety, again, I know Brandon Hillman was banged up at the end of the spring as well. Probably just need someone to step up in that area as well as a target. So, yeah, I think this is going to be, I don't think the additions are done. I think that they are going to grab some guys who kind of fortify their depth as opposed to, I don't think you're bringing in your version of Josh Wallace this summer. I think you probably have your other starting cornerback on the roster. It's just a matter of what's there behind him. Now, if you can land one like him, that'd be great. I mean, that's almost hitting the jackpot at this point, but I really do think these next couple of additions that they make will be to round out that depth on the defensive side of the ball.
And by the way, new rule, graduates cannot enter any time anymore. They had to be in by Wednesday. So we could see them trickle in. If the schools put them in, they have 48 hours to do that after they filed their paperwork. But the guys in are pretty much the guys in the portal right now. And so there won't be a Josh Wallace entering in June at this point. But these guys know, what they want to do, I guess. You give anyone a deadline, they can make a decision, right? So I think that's kind of where we're at with the transfer.
I want to give credit where credit's due because this is very much an anti-NCAA podcast. It does seem like things have been buttoned up a little more over the last few months in terms of it just not being total chaos all the time in the transfer portal. And I'll just leave it at that.
I agree. Probably one of the reasons is coaches complain like crazy and, they don't want their calendars like so crazy. But I agree. I think deadlines are good for everybody with some of this stuff. All right. We now have a special guest joining us on the podcast, Pete Nakos from On3. He's On3's sports business and transfer portal reporter, but really so much more, probably, Pete. Chasing down scoops. I think he's chasing down an Oklahoma scoop right now. So stay tuned for Oklahoma fans following us. But you can follow Pete on Twitter /X at Pete Nakos _ it's just Pete Nakos _ right?
Yeah.
So
you got it, man.
Yeah. So Pete, obviously bringing the scoops. Turn on the notifications because there are a lot of scoops coming from there. But Pete, great to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me on, guys. Happy Thursday.
Absolutely. AB's got a question to start us off.
Oh,
yeah, we'll get it going here. I guess we'll start with this, Pete. I mean, there were a ton of people saying when the spring portal opened that it was going to be chaos, that there would be this giant shift, among some of these teams that are maybe duking it out for title contention this year. I mean, what did we miss when making those types of predictions? Because really it's been kind of middling in terms of the contributors that are going elsewhere.
So I personally never thought it was going to be nuts. Now, all that said, this is a Michigan podcast, and let's be upfront. I think a lot of people thought like Alabama and Michigan were going to have some more portal entries than they've had. And I think that was a lot of assumptions that maybe wasn't the most well thought out, but there was definitely some assumptions like, hey, new head coaches, athletes didn't really have a great opportunity when Harbaugh and Saban left. Maybe this gives them the chance, but obviously Alabama and Sherrone Moore have done a fantastic job at roster retention. And that's a slew of things, right? Building a culture right away that athletes want to be a part of, having an NIL program in place that's attractive enough, things like that. But I definitely think that like the Michigans and the Alabamas and even Washington's had a little bit more than the other two. But I mean, a slew of schools have done a really good job of keeping talent together.
Do you think this is the way it's going to go? Like December is going to be when the best players jump in. December is going to be when schools, even if they're in a bowl game, or it might even be teams that are now in the 12-team playoff, but they're dedicating a lot of time and resources towards reeling those types of players in. And then April's kind of cleaning house, getting to the scholarship number. That's something that maybe people don't want to talk as much about. Like they got to get numbers down as well at different points. And then maybe the guys that are jumping in, and obviously there'll be exceptions, but are more the guys that didn't like where they were at the end of spring on the depth chart.
Yeah, I mean, I want to tell you that it's always going to be like this, but I'm also hesitant because as we all saw this week, like revenue sharing could be not imminent, but it's coming. But in this current model, like, yes, I think the spring is always going to be the time to offload players for depth guys to look for more playing time. And then obviously a lot of the guys we've seen gone in are FCS and group of 5 guys who are trying to climb the ranks and get to a bigger spotlight to perform. And then you hit the nail on the head a little bit right there, Clayton. I think a lot of programs are using the portal to make sure that they're at the 85-man scholarship. And as we've seen play out this week on social media, whenever we go on X, Deion Sanders in Colorado are controlling the narrative. But I mean, they've definitely in the last 18 months like cut players and stuff. And I guess that's the norm nowadays, right? Just kind of where we're at right now in college football.
Well, if the player's mid, then maybe you want to cut them. But obviously, yeah, that's been crazy at Colorado. I guess in terms of the player retention piece, like we all talk about NIL when it's an inducement for guys in the transfer portal, maybe tampering or whatever. But and I think Shannon Terry, the founder of On3, has tweeted about this. Like NIL actually has maybe worked in reverse in this spring transfer portal period because the collectives at the respective schools have been able to sign players to contracts, compensate them enough to where they're happy to stay where they're at. Is that the case? And how has Michigan done? You touched on it a little bit with the coaching change aspect of it, where Michigan did a good job. I think they've lost like maybe 10 guys, I think 10 or 11 since Jim Harbaugh left, but none of them have started a game, that sort of thing. Couple were in contention to, or Keon Sabb maybe started one game. Couple were in contention to be in the 2 deep, but Michigan's collective, has done a pretty good job. Maybe not on the recruiting side, not blaming them, but in terms of how the coaching staff wants to operate. But in terms of retention, it feels like they've done a good job of keeping guys in house.
I would agree with that. Keon Sabb was probably the biggest surprise for me, obviously. And then Wednesday night, Amorion Walker announces he's coming back to Michigan from Ole Miss. So no, I think Michigan's done a really good job in roster retention, and I know that Chris Bowles, who's done a great job, obviously at the Wolverine, really does a good job of kind of keeping up to date with NIL and how that impacts the roster management. But Michigan's done a good job, and you're right that maybe it isn't exactly where some fans want it to be when it comes to recruiting high school talent, but it's obviously done the job that it needed to do to keep this roster together to have a chance to compete for a Big Ten title yet again. And you look at that defense, and you guys know it better than me, but like there could have been like some huge losses there, and that didn't happen, and that's probably a big reason why Michigan's gonna be at the top of the Big Ten again this year.
Well, Pete, you've been tracking both the football and basketball portals, and obviously, the roster construction is extremely different given, 85 scholarships versus 13. But just in general, when you look at, these transfer portal recruitments or inducements or whatever it is about the process in those two sports, what do you see as the biggest difference in how the portal has affected college basketball as opposed to college football?
It's funny. Football has the biggest payroll, right, by far, but the per player average is so much larger in basketball, right? Like Arkansas is going to commit like $6 million a year, give or take, to John Calipari. Like that is a ton of money for basketball. I mean, some of these top players are getting like 1 mil to 1.5 mil in the basketball portal, and then I mean, you look at the football portal. I feel pretty confident in telling you that like there's maybe only a couple of guys right now who are going to get 7 figures. Part of that's because this football portal is just not as deep as December was, but I think that kind of gives you an idea though of like the per player average is so much higher in basketball when it comes to NIL.
Speaking of that, and going back to football specifically, I guess like we all know quarterbacks in the portal. I think there was a rumor, even Matt Rule might have come out and said it, that like top quarterbacks are $1.5 to $2 million a year, or at least that first year when you have to reel them in from the portal. When you look at NFL contracts, it's like quarterback, left tackle, edge rusher. Like a lot of those positions are kind of the guys that are getting paid the most because you either have to pass the football, you have to protect the guy who's passing the football, and you have to rush and sack the guy who's passing the football. But what positions in college football outside of quarterback are commanding the most money? Because we've seen Michigan, they've gotten a couple wide receiver transfers, one of them being Amorian Walker, another one being CJ Charleston from Youngstown State at the FCS level. Like, one, I don't think the talent was in the portal maybe that a lot of people expected it to be, but also Michigan wasn't in contention or hasn't been for some of the top tier receivers that are in. So
right.
Is that the positions? Is it D tackle? Is it edge? Where are you seeing that kind of play out?
No, I mean, you named it right away. It's the edge. It's maybe a really good defense tackle. It's a left tackle. In a very rare case, it's like an elite wide receiver. But to be honest with you, like I know a bunch of really good wide receivers who are getting like under $300,000 right now. Running back, just like the NFL, is very undervalued in the college game right now. And then maybe the one position group that like is really case by case is like the secondary. Like some teams really like choose to value that really high, and then others don't, and they would prefer to have like a really good line on both sides of the ball.
Gotcha.
Well, we've got, we're coming up here. July 1 is going to be 3 years since kind of the dawn of NIL, the explosion of NIL in the college sports scene. I know revenue sharing is something that seems inevitable. It's more of a matter of when, not if, on that front. In terms of maybe immediate next steps and then where things are a year from now, 2 years from now, where do you think we're headed with NIL, and what is the next step for college athletics in that front?
Yeah, so everything we all like saw this week and we've been hearing about for months, to be honest, is like everything stems from this House versus NCAA case. That's like an antitrust lawsuit. And if the NCAA lost, billions would have to be back paid to athletes who didn't have the opportunity to make NIL dollars. So when you hear about all these settlement talks and you hear about revenue sharing, all of this stuff is on the table because of this House versus NCAA case. And I think the one thing I always try to bring up too is like, even if there's a 2% chance that the NCAA could lose in court, they would prefer to settle. Like the consequences would be much bigger if they lost in the courtroom than just try to sit down and settle with the plaintiffs, which is this group of athletes that kind of go by House. House is, I believe, like a swimmer. But beyond that, like I do think revenue sharing is coming. I think the one thing to keep an eye on here too is for all of this to like come together. Like there isn't just going to be like revenue sharing on a Wednesday afternoon in like next February. Like Congress is going to have to step in, or there's going to have to be some sort of a collective bargaining agreement signed. And I mean, collective bargaining, like it goes on at every professional league in the country. It makes a lot of sense. But on the flip side, the one thing that doesn't make sense is that, right, JJ McCarthy was at Michigan for what, 3 years, if I'm wrong. Yeah, I mean, like JJ McCarthy's gonna probably go be in the NFL for 10 years. So like that's the problem in the college ranks of like just how much turnover there is.
Makes sense. I feel like I need a law degree just following this. You have to cover it at a national level. Are you thinking of? I don't know if you have the time, but are you thinking of going to law school or anything?
I haven't thought about law school. I mean, actually, my younger brother is a first year at law school.
Okay.
What I only talk to him on the phone now like once a week because of how busy he is. It sounds like a lot, but I don't know if I'll go to law school. Maybe I will if I don't want to do this anymore. But I love my job, so I don't see it in the cards at the moment.
Yep. No, I'm just joking, but it's crazy the amount of things.
Yeah.
Now it's going to Congress and lawsuits, and it's tough to follow. But Pete, you do a great job covering it. So we asked for 10 minutes of your time.
Can I sneak one more in real quick?
Absolutely.
Pete, give me something on the college football video game. Anything.
Okay. So Matt Brown from Extra Points does a great job. Mm-hmm. I get to cover the transfer portal, so I don't cover EA as much day to day as he does. I try to, but Matt does a great job. So he reported on the cover athletes, right? There's going to be like all of them are going to be from Power 4 conferences. I think the big misconception with all that I am happy to clear up for you is that there's not going to be like 4. There's probably going to be like 2 or 3 from my understanding. I also have been told that there's going to be like a couple editions of the game. Now, whether that's like legitimately like different copies of the game or like maybe they have like you get like 250 like ultimate team points or something like that. I've been told that they're like looking into that for like different cover athletes. So it'll be fun. I mean, I guess the thing I'm most excited for, and I'm sure you guys are for, it's like growing up, you always played and it was cool. But like your favorite quarterback was like number 6, but now like they're going to have a name and stuff. Like that's what I'm looking forward to. Past that though, I expect them to make an announcement this month about gameplay. And then we're expecting the game to be released in July. I know some dates have been thrown around. I'm really hesitant to say anything until EA says something.
They have to make a couple covers because Ohio State fans aren't going to play a game with Will Johnson on the cover. I'm sure they would, but Michigan fans aren't going to want to play a game with, some Ohio State player, Caleb Downs or something like that on the cover. So
how do we feel about a Georgia player getting on the cover?
Is that a scoop?
That's not a scoop. It's just a tease.
I think people would play it. I think people that are fans would play it, but that makes a lot of sense. Pete, thank you so much for joining us. People can follow Pete at Pete Nakos _ He's on 3 Sports Business and Transfer Portal reporter, but so much more. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, guys.
That was Pete Nakos. Now let's talk basketball for a couple minutes here to round out the show, AB, and some pretty somewhat expected news, but pretty significant news earlier in the week. Nimari Burnett is coming back for his 2nd season at Michigan. Of course, started his career at Texas Tech, played with Vlad Golden, by the way, then went to Alabama. Now at Michigan, entering year 2. He has a year of eligibility remaining after this year, but the graphic comes out and says, I'm back, with the caption, 1 more year. So taking it year to year at this point, but started every game last year, averaged nearly 10 points a game, 4.1 rebounds, 2.4 assists, nearly 40% from the field. Now, you're talking about a guy that played a bigger role, in my opinion, than suits him. I'm sure part of him liked that he had that role and was able to prove what he did. That he could be solid at point was a little bit at points. He was a little bit streaky as well, especially offensively. But at the same time, the team went 8-24. I think it's pretty clear. A little bit less usage rate there would suit him a little bit better. But I think he's another solid guard on this team that has quite a few of them who are going to be capable players. And yeah, you're probably only going to play 8-9 guys in your rotation, but man, they got 10-11 that could play some, big roles depending on how things shake out with the competitions that are going to go on there.
I like the addition or the re-addition a lot. he never entered the transfer portal or anything. So it never was really a matter of him getting recruited over, or maybe it was, I don't know. But the fact that he is back, I think from the start, we kind of speculated that he's a guy that could fit with what Dusty wants to do. And he's going to play the 3 in this system, which to me is a much better fit for him than handling on-ball duties and things like that. I think that's going to help a lot. And is he a top 2 or 3 option on a good team? No. You could make the argument he wasn't really even a top 2 or 3 option on a terrible team last year. But I like having him back. I think having veteran guys on this roster, having guys that have been here for a little bit of continuity, again, we don't know what's going to happen with Jace Howard. And to be frank, if they wound up parting ways, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. It's probably maybe ideal for them from a roster building standpoint because you can go out and add someone else. But, Namari Burnett, Will Cheddar, those are guys that have been here. And I thought were 2 of the quote unquote bright spots of last year's team, at least in terms of what they brought from a role player perspective. So not just Burnett, but with him and Cheddar, I think you've got guys now that, have been there. You have that familiarity with the program, with the Chrysler Center, with the university. I think that there is some value to that because I'm not, having it be a top to bottom total rebuild, I think was not, it could have worked. And with the roster that they've built, I mean, I certainly think they'd have been fine, but I just like the continuity of having a couple guys that were here when things were as bad as they were, because they're going to make damn sure it doesn't happen again. And they're going to be part of that and part of that resurgence that we think is coming next year. So from a Burnett perspective, I think you're probably looking at, if I had to map out what a starting lineup would look like based on the guys they have now. They're not getting Nelly Davis, by the way. He's committed to Arkansas. So that pipe dream is kind of out the window. I think you're looking at Trey Donaldson at the point, Roddy Gale at the 2, though Gale can play the 3 as well. I think in the system they're going to run. Probably looking at Sam Walters at the 4 and then Vlad Golden at the 5. I think we talked about this the other day. They could probably afford to add a forward somewhere. But other than that, I like how this has taken shape. And yeah, they were probably a lead dog in the portal, like a Nelly Davis, away from being a team that could probably go to the NCAA tournament and make a lot of noise. And now I just think they're a really good basketball team that will make the tournament and still has that upside. But it's going to be interesting to see who develops as the lead bucket getter on this team, because that's really, they've checked all the boxes otherwise. I think that they've done a really nice job in assembling this roster, and there could be more. But if this is where they land, I think they're in a pretty good spot.
I agree. The big question is who's going to be the go-to guy, late clock, late game situations. I think Roddy Gale probably thinks he's that guy, and I think he has the chance to be. He was hurt last year. He was dealing with a wrist injury that I think held back his shooting numbers. I mean, he was under 30% from 3, but he's proven he can do more than that. And I think Roddy Gale, his game, has the potential to do that. He has the athleticism. So that's going to be the big question. We'll see if they find, maybe they go get that guy. Like you said, they could still have more additions here. And the last thing I'll say is Namari Burnett, I think, is a much better defender than what he showed last year. Last year on defense, everything was a complete mess. And it's hard to be one good defender when the rotations are late, the rotations are slow, the rotations aren't there pretty much. And nobody's doing what they're supposed to do. And you don't know if you're in man or zone half the time, that sort of thing. It's hard to have one guy that stands out on defense, especially on the perimeter with what you're going to do. Terrace Reed showed some flashes, but Namari Burnett played good defense at Alabama. I think he can do that again if they have a connected group on the defensive side. And I believe they will. But yeah,
they're going to be much better coached on that side of the ball. That hot take.
No question. So keep it locked at thewolverine.com for your Michigan football, basketball, and recruiting coverage. Again, the promo code is UM1 for 2 months of premium access for just $1. So 50 cents a month. Best deal in America. Thanks for watching. We'll see you Monday.